There is a scene near the middle of Whiplash where Andrew Neiman sits alone in a practice room at 2 in the morning, his hands wrapped in cloth, blood seeping through the wrapping, and starts playing again. Not because anyone told him to, not because a rehearsal is scheduled or a competition is approaching, because stopping is no longer something he knows how to do. He sits at that drum kit the way some people sit with an addiction, not for the pleasure of it anymore, not even entirely for the goal, but because the space between him and the drums has closed so completely that being away from it feels less like rest and more like disappearance. Most people who watch Whiplash remember the shouting and the chair and J.K. Simmons filling a door frame like a weather system. That memory is not wrong. It is just the surface. Underneath it, Damien Chazelle built something quieter and stranger. A portrait of a young man who wanted greatness so completely that he forgot to ask what greatness was actually for. Section 1. The first image. What the opening scene tells you: everything. There is a hallway in the opening seconds of Whiplash that most people forget the moment the film moves past it. It is long and dim, the kind of corridor that exists in old institutional buildings where the light has never quite managed to fill the space properly. The walls are bare. The floors are concrete. There is no music playing from anywhere else in the building, no voices, no ambient sound of the kind that tells you a place is alive and occupied. There is only one sound, and it is coming from behind a set of double doors at the far end of the hallway. Someone is playing drums. Not performing, not rehearsing in any casual way, but playing with a kind of concentrated ferocity that fills the corridor, even through the closed doors. The camera does not rush toward the sound. It holds at the far end of the hallway for a moment, letting the drumming reach the audience before the drummer does, letting the sound establish its presence before anything else is established. And then it moves, slowly and deliberately, toward those doors. This is the first image Damien Chazelle gives the audience. Not a face, not a name, not a piece of dialogue that sets up the world or explains the characters or positions the story within any recognizable genre. Just a hallway, a closed door, and the sound of someone drumming alone in the dark. By the time the film ends, everything it has said about ambition and obsession and the cost of the single-minded pursuit of greatness will have been contained inside that first image, already present in the 30 seconds before Andrew Neiman's face appears on screen for the first time. Andrew is 19 years old when the film begins. He is a student at the Schaefer Conservatory in New York City, a fictional institution built on the model of the most prestigious music schools in the country, the kind of place where the competition is ferocious from the moment students arrive, and where the difference between the people who make it and the people who don't is treated as a fixed and immovable fact of nature. He is a drummer, specifically a jazz drummer, and he is very good. Probably better than most of the other students around him, though the film is careful not to establish this in any simple or flattering way. What the film establishes instead, in these first 30 seconds before a word is spoken, is something more interesting and more troubling than talent. What it establishes is appetite. The way Andrew plays in that opening scene is not the way someone plays because they enjoy playing. The physicality of it is too intense for enjoyment, too focused, too relentless. He plays the way someone plays when they are chasing something. His eyes are not glazed or dreaming in the way that musicians sometimes look when they are genuinely lost in the music. They are sharp, locked on the middle distance, tracking some internal measure against which he is constantly assessing himself. His hands move with precision and speed, and the drumming is good, genuinely good. But the feeling coming off it is not the feeling of joy or expression or communication. It is the feeling of a person who has decided that this specific thing, this skill, this instrument, this level of mastery is the only thing that matters, and who has organized his entire being around the pursuit of it with a completeness that has left very little room for anything else. Damien Chazelle has spoken in interviews about drawing on his own experiences as a jazz drummer in high school, about the specific dread he felt in rehearsals, about the kind of teacher who believes that fear and pressure are the only real tools for producing excellence. But the more revealing detail is something he said about the Charlie Parker mythology that sits at the center of the film. His father, a jazz enthusiast, told him the story of Parker and the cymbal when Chazelle was 8 years old. The story, as it gets told in the film by both Fletcher and Andrew, goes like this. A young Charlie Parker was playing a jam session with the legendary drummer Joe Jones, who was part of the Count Basie Orchestra. Parker made mistakes. He lost the chord changes. And Jones, in response to this, threw a cymbal at Parker's feet, a gesture of contempt that humiliated the young musician in front of everyone in the room. Parker went home that night and wept. And then he practiced. He practiced with an obsessive intensity that he had not possessed before that night, driven by the specific kind of wound that only public humiliation can produce. And a year later, by the time he came back, he had become Charlie Parker. The Bird, one of the greatest jazz musicians who ever lived. Andrew Neiman has absorbed this story the way some people absorb religion. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a complicated piece of jazz history to be examined critically, but as a creation myth, as proof that the path to greatness runs directly through the experience of being broken and choosing, in the moment of breaking, to rebuild yourself into something that can never be broken in the same way again. The cymbal story is the founding text of his internal life, the document against which he measures everything that happens to him, the lens through which he interprets every moment of pressure and pain and humiliation, as evidence that he is on the right road rather than evidence that something might be wrong. What the opening scene captures, in the 30 seconds before a single line of dialogue, is this: a young man, alone in a hallway, playing with everything he has, with nobody watching and nobody listening except the building itself. The drumming is not being performed for anyone. It is being performed for the internal measure, for the standard that lives inside Andrew's head, for the version of himself that he is always measuring the current version against and finding slightly insufficient. The hallway is important here. It is not a stage. It is not a practice room filled with the equipment and community of a music school. It is a corridor, a transitional space, the kind of place people pass through on the way to somewhere else. Andrew is not passing through. He is inhabiting it. He has made a home in the space between where he is and where he is trying to go. And the drumming is what he does while he lives there. Fletcher enters the hallway. He has been listening from behind the double doors, and he pushes them open quietly and stands at the far end of the corridor, watching Andrew without announcing himself. This is the moment the film establishes the power dynamic that will structure everything that follows. Fletcher is not performing anything in this moment. He is assessing. He watches with the specific attention of someone who has been looking for something for a long time and is not yet certain he has found it. He watches Andrew drum. Andrew notices him and stops. A brief, stilted exchange happens, in which Fletcher asks Andrew a few questions about his tempo, makes a remark or two that land with a sharpness Andrew does not quite know how to process, and then leaves without ceremony. The encounter takes less than a minute. By the time it ends, Fletcher has said very little of substance, and Andrew has said even less. And yet, Everything about the relationship that is about to unfold between them has already been drawn in the air of that corridor. What Chazelle is doing with this structure, beginning with an image before beginning with a story, is making an argument about the nature of what the film is going to examine. He is saying that ambition at this level, the kind Andrew carries in his body in that opening scene, is not primarily a social phenomenon. It does not require an audience. It does not require validation or encouragement or the presence of another person who believes in it. It exists in empty hallways at odd hours, feeding on itself, sustained by an internal vision of what the self might become that functions almost like a parallel person living inside the ordinary one. Andrew drums alone in that corridor, not because he has been assigned to practice there, or because it is the best available space. He drums there because the drumming is constant. It is the activity that organizes his experience of being alive, and it does not stop when he leaves the practice room, or when the school day ends, or when there is nobody to observe it. It is simply what he does. The cinematographer on Whiplash was Sharon Mayer, and the decision to open in that particular quality of institutional dimness was deliberate. The practice rooms in the film are shot with a metallic, almost cold quality that strips away any romance the idea of jazz music might carry. Jazz, in the cultural imagination, lives in amber light and intimate clubs, in the warmth of late-night performance and the loose communal energy of musicians playing together for the love of it. The Schaeffer Conservatory, as Mayer photographs it, looks nothing like that. It looks like a facility. It looks like a place where something very serious is being undertaken by people who have decided to treat the pursuit of beauty as a military operation. The warmth has been removed deliberately, because warmth is not what this story is about. This story is about something harder and stranger, about what happens to a person who wants something badly enough to submit themselves to conditions that would drive most people away. By the time Fletcher steps back through those double doors and disappears, Andrew is left alone again in the hallway. He goes back to his drums. The drumming resumes, and the film cuts forward into the story proper, into the first rehearsal, the first public humiliation, the first moment Fletcher throws something at Andrew's head, the first night Andrew practices until his hands bleed and wraps them in cloth and goes back to practicing. But everything that happens in those later scenes is already implicit in the hallway. The appetite was already there. The willingness to endure was already there. The question the film is going to spend its entire running time examining, which is whether appetite and willingness to endure are the same thing as health, was already present in the 30 seconds before anyone said a word. The first image of Whiplash is a young man alone in a dark hallway, playing as if no one is watching. Playing as if the playing itself is not quite the point, but only the closest available approximation of the point. That image does not resolve into something comfortable by the end of the film. It deepens. It becomes more complicated. It accumulates weight with every scene that follows. But it was there from the beginning, in the corridor, in the sound coming through closed doors, in the specific quality of a person so consumed by what they want to become that they have made a home in the space between who they are and who they are trying to be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The hallway told the whole story before the story began. Andrew alone in the dark, playing for no one, driven by something that lived entirely inside him. That drive was built on a myth, a story about Charlie Parker and a flying cymbal. And understanding that myth is the only way to understand everything Andrew does next. Section 2. The Dream. What Andrew actually wants and why it matters. There is a dinner scene in the middle of Whiplash that does not get discussed as often as the rehearsal sequences or the final performance, but that sits at the center of everything the film is actually saying about ambition and the hunger that drives it. Andrew is at a family meal. His father is there, a gentle and quietly literary man played by Paul Reiser, the kind of father who reads and thinks and takes his son's aspirations seriously in the way that loving, educated, somewhat unsuccessful people take the aspirations of their children seriously. There are cousins and aunts and uncles around the table, the ordinary warm noise of an extended family gathering, people passing dishes and asking questions and doing the social work of staying connected to one another. And someone at the table, an uncle or a cousin, makes an offhand remark that is meant as a compliment. He mentions that two of the younger people at the table have been doing well in their sports, that they have made certain teams, achieved certain recognitions. He turns to Andrew and notes, in the same warm and inclusive tone, that Andrew is at Schaefer Conservatory, that he plays drums, that this is also a fine thing. He is trying to include Andrew in the celebration of the family's young people. He is doing what families do. Andrew's response is very quiet and very controlled, but underneath the control, there is something that takes a moment to fully register. He is offended. Not hurt in the way that sensitive people get hurt when they feel overlooked or misunderstood. He is offended in the way that a person gets offended when they feel that something sacred has been placed alongside something ordinary. When the thing they have organized their entire interior life around has been casually grouped with achievements that, to their mind, do not belong in the same conversation. He tries to explain the difference between being at Schaefer Conservatory and making a local sports team. He tries to explain what Schaefer represents, what the standards are, what it means to be selected for Fletcher's studio band. The family nods politely, and the conversation moves on. And Andrew sits inside the polite nodding with an expression of such specific, recognizable frustration that the scene becomes one of the most quietly devastating in the film. Not because the family was cruel, they were not. Because Andrew has already traveled so far inside his ambition that the ordinary world of family dinners and polite encouragement has become almost unintelligible to him. This scene matters because it shows what Andrew wants underneath the drumming. He does not want to play well. He does not want to enjoy music, or to share music, or to contribute to a musical tradition that he loves. He wants to be undeniable. He wants to be the kind of great that makes comparison impossible. The kind of great that removes all ambiguity about where he stands in relation to everyone else who has ever tried. He wants to be the version of himself that nobody at a family dinner would ever think to place alongside a kid who made the junior varsity football team. He wants to be Charlie Parker. The myth of Charlie Parker runs through Whiplash the way a river runs through a landscape, shaping everything around it without always being visible. Parker, whose nickname in jazz circles was Bird, is widely considered one of the most important figures in the history of American music. He was a saxophonist who, in the 1940s, helped develop a style of jazz called bebop that transformed what the music could do harmonically and rhythmically. He played with a technical facility and improvisational intelligence that left his contemporaries struggling to understand how he was doing what he was doing. He was also, by most accounts, a deeply troubled person who struggled with heroin addiction for most of his adult life and died at 34 years old in circumstances that reflected decades of self-destruction. He is the kind of figure who gets called a genius so often that the word begins to lose its texture, to become simply a label attached to a name rather than a description of anything specific. What the film takes from the Parker mythology, and what Fletcher uses as the philosophical foundation for everything he does in the rehearsal room, is a single story. In 1937, in Kansas City, A very young Charlie Parker was playing a jam session at a club called the Reno Club, with musicians who included Joe Jones, the drummer for the Count Basie Orchestra. Parker was still developing. He was skilled, but not yet what he would become. At some point during the session, he lost his way, fell behind, lost the chord changes, and faltered publicly in front of an audience and a group of professional musicians. Jones, in response to this, dropped a cymbal to the floor near Parker's feet. Whether the cymbal was thrown at Parker's head, as Fletcher insists in the film, or simply dropped as a signal of displeasure, as most jazz historians suggest the actual incident involved, is a distinction the film acknowledges and then deliberately sets aside. Fletcher's version, the more violent and more dramatic version, is the version that matters for the story he is telling, because it is the version in which humiliation is active and intentional rather than merely dismissive. In Fletcher's telling, and in Andrew's internalization of Fletcher's telling, Parker went home that night and cried. He felt the specific kind of shame that comes from being found insufficient in front of people whose judgment matters, from being told, through an act of contempt, that he was not yet what he believed himself to be. And then, instead of deciding that jazz was not for him, or that the professional musicians who had humiliated him were wrong, or that the standards of the world he was trying to enter were unreasonable, Parker made a different decision. He decided to practice until the gap between what he was and what he wanted to be no longer existed. He practiced with an intensity and focus that the story describes as almost inhuman. And a year later, he came back and played in a way that made what had happened the previous year impossible to imagine. The cymbal had not broken him. It had made him. And he had gone on to become one of the greatest musicians who ever lived. Which, in Fletcher's framework, is evidence that the humiliation was not only acceptable, but necessary. That without Joe Jones and his cymbal, there would have been no Bird. That cruelty in the service of greatness is not cruelty at all, but a form of love so advanced that only the most serious artists can receive it properly. Andrew believes this. He believes it the way people believe in creation myths, not because he has examined the evidence carefully and found it convincing, but because the myth arrived at exactly the moment in his development when he needed something to organize his hunger around, and it fit. He is 19 years old and he wants to be great, and the Parker story tells him that the path to greatness runs through suffering, and that the suffering is meaningful, and that the people who inflict it are, on some level, serving the future legend rather than harming the current person. This is a very useful thing to believe if you are going to survive what Fletcher's rehearsal room is about to do to you. It is also, as the film gradually and quietly demonstrates, a story with significant gaps in it. The first gap is the simplest one. The cymbal story, even in its most dramatic telling, does not actually explain Charlie Parker. It explains one night in 1937. Parker was already deeply committed to music before that night. He had already been practicing obsessively for years before Joe Jones ever picked up a cymbal. He had been working with older musicians, learning the tradition, developing the harmonic and rhythmic instincts that would eventually produce bebop. The cymbal, whatever it did to his motivation in the short term, did not create his talent or his commitment or his vision. Those existed before it and would likely have continued developing without it. What the myth does, by focusing on the single dramatic incident of humiliation and transformation, is erase all the ordinary, sustained work that preceded and followed it, and replace that messy reality with a clean narrative about suffering producing genius. The story is compelling precisely because it is incomplete. It gives ambition a dramatic shape, a moment of crisis and transformation that the actual experience of becoming good at something almost never contains. Andrew, because he is 19, and because he needs the myth more than he needs the complexity, takes the story whole. He does not question what else Parker might have needed besides the symbol. He does not ask what Parker gave up, or what the decades of addiction and self-destruction that followed the period of greatest creativity might say about the sustainability of the model. He takes the part of the story that confirms what he already wants to do, which is submit himself completely to the pursuit of excellence and accept whatever suffering comes with that submission. And he builds his identity around it. By the time Fletcher enters his life, Andrew has already prepared himself to be Fletcher's student. He has already decided, on some level, that the person who will push him hardest is the person who cares about him most. And that discomfort is not a signal that something is wrong, but a signal that something important is happening. This preparation is visible in the dinner table scene in a way that is easy to miss on a first viewing. When Andrew tries to explain to his family what Schaefer means, what Fletcher's band means, what the standards of that world are, he is not just defending himself against a casual social slight. He is rehearsing the story he tells himself about why the ordinary world does not apply to him. The cousins who made sports teams, the relatives with their ordinary achievements and their ordinary recognitions, exist in a different register of human experience than the one Andrew has decided to inhabit. His register requires more. It costs more. And the cost is the point. The cost is the evidence that the thing being pursued is real and serious and worth pursuing. Because if it were easy or comfortable, it would not be worth the life Andrew is organizing around it. Damien Chazelle has said in interviews that the film asks whether the ends justify the means, whether the production of a great artist through brutal methods is a moral transaction that can be evaluated simply by looking at the quality of the art that results. But before the film can ask that question honestly, it has to establish what Andrew actually understands himself to be doing, what the internal logic of his pursuit looks like from the inside. And the internal logic is this. He has decided that greatness of the kind he wants is not compatible with a normal life. That the things normal people protect, their comfort and their relationships and their sense of self-worth that does not depend on the judgment of a terrifying authority figure, are things he is willing to surrender in exchange for the possibility of becoming what Parker became. He has made this decision before Fletcher makes it for him. Fletcher does not impose a sacrificial framework on an unwilling student. He arrives to find a student who has already constructed the framework and is waiting for someone to fill the role of Joe Jones. This is one of the more uncomfortable things the film asks the audience to sit with. Andrew is not simply a victim of Fletcher's methods. He is, in a specific and important sense, a collaborator in them. He wants what Fletcher is offering badly enough that he accepts the terms before he fully understands them. And then, when he begins to understand them, he accepts them anyway. Because the alternative, walking away, relinquishing the framework, admitting that perhaps the myth of the symbol is not a reliable guide to becoming great, would require him to rebuild his entire sense of what he is doing and why. And he is not ready to do that. He is not sure, at 19 years old, that he has anything to rebuild with. What Andrew wants, underneath the drumming and the bloody hands and the sacrifice of the girlfriend he cares about and the family dinners he attends with diminishing presence, is to be the kind of person whose existence cannot be argued with. He wants to be great enough that the question of whether he made the right choices, whether the cost was appropriate, whether the suffering was necessary, becomes irrelevant because the achievement speaks so loudly that the method is eclipsed by the result. He wants to be Bird. Not because he loves Parker's music above all other music, though he does love it, but because Parker represents the possibility that a person can want something badly enough and suffer for it completely enough to become genuinely undeniable, to become in the most complete sense, proof. The family dinner does not give him that. Fletcher's rehearsal room, brutal and demeaning and shot through with cruelty that serves no consistent pedagogical purpose, does not give him that either. What it gives him is the sensation of being tested at a level that matches the seriousness of what he wants. And for Andrew, at 19, that sensation is very close to what he was looking for. It feels like the antechamber to greatness. It feels like the year after the symbol, the year of practice and pain and transformation that precedes the return. He does not yet know what will be waiting for him at the end of it, or whether the transformation he is undergoing is the kind that produces a Bird or the kind that produces a Sean Casey. He does not yet know that the myth has a shadow side that Fletcher is very careful never to mention. But the myth is already doing its work. It is shaping what Andrew sees when he looks at his life and what he is unable to see. It is making the drumming in the empty hallway feel heroic rather than lonely. It is making the family dinner feel like evidence of his seriousness rather than a reminder of what ordinary warmth feels like. It is making the approaching figure of Terence Fletcher feel, in those first encounters in the dim corridor of the conservatory, less like a threat and more like an answer to a question Andrew has been carrying inside him since before he could have articulated what the question was. The dream is not the music. The dream is the transformation the music might produce. And Andrew has decided, before the film has properly begun, to pay whatever the transformation costs. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The dream was already fully formed before Fletcher arrived. Andrew had built the mythology, accepted the terms, and prepared himself for whatever came next. What came next was Terence Fletcher, a man who had his own mythology, his own justifications, and his own very specific idea of what a teacher is supposed to do to the people who need him most. Section 3. Fletcher, the man who believes cruelty is love. There is a moment early in Whiplash, before Fletcher has done anything truly terrible, before the chair has been thrown or the slap has landed, or the public humiliation has reached the pitch it will eventually reach, where he walks into a rehearsal room and the entire band goes silent, in a way that is not quite like the silence that falls when a teacher enters a classroom. It is closer to the silence that falls when the temperature in a room changes suddenly, when the air itself seems to register that something has shifted. The musicians who were talking stop talking. The ones who were adjusting their instruments put them down carefully. Everyone straightens slightly, without being asked to, and Fletcher walks to the front of the room and sets down his bag and looks out at them with an expression that is almost pleasant, almost warm, and the warmth is somehow more frightening than anger would have been. Because the warmth is not reassurance. It is the particular warmth of a person who is completely comfortable in his own authority, who has no anxiety about what is about to happen in this room, because whatever happens will be exactly what he decides should happen. The band knows this. They have been in this room with him before. They know that the warmth can become something else in an instant, and that the instant is impossible to predict, and that the impossibility of prediction is not an accident. Terence Fletcher, as Damien Chazelle wrote him, and as J.K. Simmons inhabited him in a performance that won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, is one of the most carefully constructed figures in recent American cinema. He is not a simple villain. He is not a sadist who enjoys cruelty for its own sake, though cruelty is one of his primary tools. He is not a burned-out teacher who has given up on his students and is simply going through the motions of authority while harming the people in his care. He is something more complicated and more troubling than either of those things. He is a true believer. He genuinely believes, with a consistency and a totality that the film never quite allows the audience to dismiss, that what he is doing in that rehearsal room is the most important work a person can do, and that the methods he uses are not just acceptable, but necessary. That without them, the thing he is working toward, the production of a genuinely great musician, cannot happen. Chazelle has said that Fletcher was drawn from a composite of difficult teachers and demanding authority figures, that no single person served as the direct model, but that the emotional truth of Fletcher came from Chazelle's own experiences in a highly competitive high school band program, where the atmosphere of fear and pressure was real and sustained. The character is also, Chazelle has acknowledged, an extreme version of something that exists in every serious artistic training environment. A version that pushes the logic of demanding instruction to a place where instruction becomes indistinguishable from abuse. Fletcher is what you get when you take the genuine insight that great art requires great suffering, that comfort is the enemy of excellence, that a teacher who only tells students what they want to hear is not really teaching them anything, and remove every check on that insight. When you follow that logic all the way to its end, without any of the countervailing pressures that normally contain it. When you decide that because some pressure produces growth, unlimited pressure must produce unlimited growth, and that anyone who breaks under the pressure was never going to be great anyway. The philosophy Fletcher articulates most clearly comes in a scene where he explains himself to Andrew directly, in one of the few moments in the film where Fletcher drops the performance of authority and speaks with something approaching honesty. He tells the story of Charlie Parker and Joe Jones again, the symbol, the humiliation, the year of practice, the return. And then he makes the argument explicit. He says that the two most harmful words in the English language are good job. That encouragement kills potential. That the musicians who were told they were doing fine at every stage of their development are the musicians who ended up doing fine. And fine is not what music needs. What music needs, in Fletcher's framework, are the rare individuals who are capable of being pushed past the point where ordinary people stop, who have something inside them that does not break when everything around it is designed to break it, and who emerge from that pressure not diminished, but transformed. He is waiting, he says, for the next Charlie Parker. And no one is going to tell him that the way to find the next Charlie Parker is to be gentle. The film does not present this philosophy as simply wrong. This is one of the choices that made Whiplash genuinely controversial when it was released, and that continues to generate serious disagreement among people who have thought carefully about it. There are musicians, teachers, people who have worked at the highest levels of demanding artistic disciplines, who watched Fletcher's rehearsal room scenes and recognized something real in them, something that matched their own experience of the kind of pressure that produces excellence. The film is honest enough to show that Andrew does get better under Fletcher's instruction. The drumming at the end of the film is demonstrably more accomplished than the drumming in the opening hallway. Something happened in the rehearsal room that produced a real result, and Chazelle refuses to pretend otherwise. Fletcher's methods are abusive, and the film knows they are abusive. But it also knows, and this is the uncomfortable part, that they worked on this particular student in this particular way. What the film is more interested in than the question of whether Fletcher's methods work is the question of what they cost, and more specifically, who pays the cost that Fletcher never accounts for. This is where Sean Casey enters the story, or rather, where Sean Casey's absence enters it. Casey is a former student of Fletcher's, a trumpeter, and the film introduces him indirectly through the way Fletcher speaks about him in what appears to be a moment of genuine grief. Fletcher stops a rehearsal and tells the band, his voice quiet and clearly affected, that a former student of his has died in a car accident. He describes the student as one of the most talented musicians he had worked with. He plays a recording of the students playing for the band, and the music is genuinely beautiful. And the moment has the texture of real loss. The band is moved. Andrew is moved. Fletcher himself appears to be moved. Every part of this is a lie. Casey did not die in a car accident. He died by suicide after suffering from depression and anxiety that his family and their lawyers would later argue was directly attributable to Fletcher's methods. Fletcher knows this. He knew it when he told the band about the car accident. He knew it when he played the recording and accepted the sympathy of his musicians. He took the death of a student who had been destroyed by his teaching and turned it into a motivational tool. A story about the preciousness of musical talent and the tragedy of its loss, designed to make the band play harder and feel more grateful for the opportunity to be in the room with him. The manipulation is so complete and so cynical that it is difficult to process on a first viewing. It only becomes fully clear later in the film when Andrew learns the truth and has to reassemble what the moment in the rehearsal room actually was. Casey is the shadow the film refuses to let disappear. He is the answer to the question of what Fletcher's philosophy produces in the students who are not Andrew Neiman, who do not have whatever combination of stubbornness and appetite and particular psychological makeup allowed Andrew to absorb the damage and keep going. For every student who comes through Fletcher's rehearsal room and emerges transformed, the film is asking, how many Sean Caseys are there? How many people broke under the pressure and did not come back stronger? How many people took the message that they were insufficient, that they did not have what it takes, that the gap between what they were and what the music required was unbridgeable, and carried that message home and let it do its work in the dark? Fletcher never counts these. In his framework, they do not count. They were not going to be great anyway, and the purpose of the pressure was precisely to find out who was and who was not. The ones who break were always going to break eventually. Better to find out in the rehearsal room than later. This is the part of Fletcher's philosophy that the film treats as genuinely monstrous. Not because it is incoherent, but because it is so seamlessly self-serving. Fletcher has constructed a belief system in which every outcome confirms his methods. If a student succeeds, the methods worked. If a student fails, the methods revealed a limitation that was always there. If a student dies, that is a tragedy, but it is framed as the tragedy of lost potential rather than the tragedy of a person destroyed by sustained abuse. There is no result that could falsify Fletcher's theory of teaching, because the theory is designed to absorb every result without modification. A person who can build a belief system that airtight around the exercise of their own power is not a teacher operating from genuine pedagogical principle. They are something more like an ideologue, someone for whom the belief system serves the behavior rather than the behavior serving the belief. J.K. Simmons understood this about Fletcher when he prepared for the role, and it is visible in the performance in a way that the script alone could not have produced. Simmons has said that what he looked for in the character was the place where everything Fletcher does comes from love. A love for music that is so absolute and so disproportionate that it has crowded out most of what would normally be called care for other people. Fletcher loves music the way people love things when the love has become pathological, when it has stopped being a relationship with something external and become instead a framework for understanding everything. The music is the only thing that matters, and people are only interesting to Fletcher insofar as they are capable of serving the music. This is not cynicism on his part. It is, in his own understanding, the highest possible form of dedication. And the performance carries this distinction in every scene. The sense of a man who is genuinely suffering when the music is bad, genuinely transported when it is good, and genuinely indifferent to the human cost of the distance between those two states. The scenes in which Fletcher is most frightening are not the scenes of obvious cruelty. The slaps and the chair throws and the sustained public humiliations over tempo that go on long past any conceivable pedagogical purpose. Those scenes are frightening, but they are frightening in a legible way. The more unsettling moments are the ones where Fletcher is almost kind, where he puts his hand on Andrew's shoulder and speaks softly about what greatness requires, where he tells Andrew, in what sounds almost like confidence, that he pushes the people he believes in hardest because he can see what they are capable of, and he refuses to let them settle for less. These moments are designed to make Andrew and the audience wonder whether the cruelty has a logic behind it that redeems it, whether the warmth in these quieter moments is the real Fletcher, and the rage is just the instrument he uses to get where the warmth is trying to go. The film lets this ambiguity live without resolving it cheaply, because the ambiguity is the point. Fletcher is genuinely complex in the way that people who cause serious harm while believing themselves to be benefactors are genuinely complex. The belief does not make the harm less real, but it makes Fletcher less reducible to simple villainy. And that irreducibility is what makes him one of the most interesting figures the film could have chosen for the role he plays. What Fletcher does to Andrew over the course of the film is not random cruelty. It follows a pattern that will be recognizable to anyone who has been in a relationship, professional or personal, with someone who uses the strategic withdrawal and reapplication of approval as a form of control. Fletcher selects Andrew. He elevates him. He allows Andrew to feel, briefly, the warmth of being seen by someone whose judgment matters enormously. And then he withdraws it, suddenly and without warning, in a way that makes Andrew desperate to get it back. The elevation and the withdrawal alternate across the film in a rhythm that keeps Andrew permanently off balance, never secure enough to trust his own assessment of his playing, never abandoned enough to leave. This is not an accident of Fletcher's personality. It is a technique. Whether he knows it is a technique, or has simply discovered through years of practice that it produces the results he wants, is one of the questions the film leaves open. But the effect on Andrew is visible and cumulative, and by the middle of the film, Fletcher's approval has become the primary organizing principle of Andrew's inner life, in a way that has very little to do with music anymore, and a great deal to do with something that looks, from the outside, uncomfortably like a damaged attachment. The man who believes cruelty is love is not lying about the love. That is the thing that makes Fletcher genuinely tragic rather than simply villainous. He loves music with a completeness that most people never feel about anything. And from inside that love, the cruelty is not cruelty. It is devotion. It is the highest form of respect he knows how to offer. The respect of taking someone seriously enough to demand everything from them. He has simply made the catastrophic error of forgetting, or perhaps never knowing, that the people he is demanding everything from are not instruments in service of the music. They are people. And people, unlike instruments, break in ways that do not always produce better music on the other side of the breaking. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Fletcher's belief in his own methods was total and immovable. But belief alone does not determine what a relationship does to the person inside it. The next thing to understand is the specific moment the trap closed around Andrew, the day Fletcher chose him, and what that choosing actually meant. Section 4. The audition. The moment the trap closes. There is something worth noticing about the way Fletcher first selects Andrew that the film presents almost casually, as though it is simply a plot event rather than the psychological pivot on which everything else in the story turns. Andrew is practicing alone, as he almost always is, in one of the conservatory's smaller rooms. Fletcher appears in the doorway without announcement, the same way he appeared in the hallway in the film's opening minutes, and watches for a moment before making his presence known. He asks Andrew to play something. Andrew plays. Fletcher listens with an expression that gives nothing away, asks a few technical questions, makes a remark that could be read as either mildly encouraging or simply neutral, and then leaves. The whole thing takes a few minutes. It is quiet and undramatic, nothing like the rehearsal room scenes that will follow it. And yet something has happened in those few minutes that Andrew will spend the rest of the film trying to get back to. A feeling so brief and so potent that its absence will drive him to bleed onto his drumheads and crawl out of a car wreck and walk onto a stage with injuries that should have sent him to a hospital. What happened is that Fletcher looked at him. Really looked, with the specific attention of someone whose judgment Andrew had already decided was the only judgment that mattered. Before Fletcher said a word, before any evaluation was offered, the simple fact of being seen by that particular person in that particular way produced something in Andrew that the rest of his life had not managed to produce. Not pride exactly, not confidence. Something closer to recognition. The sensation of being identified correctly, of having the interior thing that Andrew had been protecting and developing in empty hallways finally perceived by someone with the authority to confirm that it was real and worth protecting. Fletcher looked at him, and Andrew felt, for a moment, that the version of himself he was trying to become was visible to another person, that it existed outside his own hope for it. This is the trap. Not the rehearsal room, not the chair, not the slap, not the sustained campaign of humiliation that Fletcher will wage across the weeks that follow. The trap is this moment, this brief and quiet experience of being genuinely seen by someone whose vision Andrew trusts more than his own. Because once that experience has happened, once Andrew has felt what it feels like to exist in the clarity of Fletcher's attention, he will do almost anything to get back there. The rehearsal room is not where the trap closes. The trap closes in the small practice room, in the few minutes of quiet assessment. In the moment Fletcher pauses before leaving and looks at Andrew one more time, with something in his expression that Andrew will spend months trying to correctly interpret. Fletcher selects Andrew for the studio band's alternate drummer position shortly after this encounter. The selection is itself a form of pressure, a statement that Andrew is good enough to be in the room, but not yet good enough to matter in the room. And the distance between those two positions is where Fletcher will do his most effective work. Being the alternate means watching someone else hold the position Andrew wants, means being close enough to the thing he is reaching for to feel its outline, but not close enough to hold it. It is a placement of almost surgical precision in terms of its motivational effect. Andrew cannot relax because he does not have what he wants. He cannot despair because he is close enough to see it. He can only work continuously with the specific anxious energy of a person who is one evaluation away from either getting everything or losing everything. The first full rehearsal is where the audience understands, completely and without ambiguity, what kind of room this is going to be. Fletcher enters, and the silence falls in the way described earlier, that particular quality of silence that is not respect but fear wearing the posture of respect. He moves through the band with an attention that seems almost gentle at first, adjusting things, listening, making small corrections. And then something shifts. A musician plays a note that is not quite right, or plays at a tempo that does not match what Fletcher was hearing in his head. And the gentleness is gone so suddenly that the band, which should have been used to this by now, still flinches. What replaces the gentleness is not simply anger. It is something more theatrical and more calculated than anger. Fletcher performs his displeasure in a way that is designed to maximize its effect on everyone in the room, not just the musician who triggered it. The humiliation is public and extended, and contains enough personal detail to make clear that Fletcher has been paying close attention, that he knows things about the people in his band that they did not know he knew, and that the knowledge is not going to be used kindly. Andrew watches all of this from the alternate's position. He is not the target of the first assault. He is in the audience for it, along with everyone else in the room. And the experience of watching someone else receive what Fletcher can deliver is its own form of instruction. It tells Andrew what is at stake. It tells him what the room costs. And it tells him, because Andrew's internal logic is already structured around the Parker mythology, that what he is watching is the mechanism by which great musicians are made. He watches a fellow student be publicly destroyed and files it under the category of necessary suffering rather than unnecessary cruelty. Because the alternative, filing it under unnecessary cruelty, would require him to reassess the framework he has built his ambition on. And he is not ready to do that. The moment Andrew becomes the core drummer, when he steps into the position he has been angling toward, arrives through a specific sequence that the film constructs with careful attention to the psychology of desperation. The existing core drummer, a student named Carl, loses his sheet music at a competition. Andrew tells Fletcher that he can play the piece from memory, that he knows it well enough to perform without the sheets. This is true, because Andrew has been preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity, practicing not just his own part, but everything, preparing for the moment when circumstance might create an opening. He performs. He is good. Fletcher promotes him. What follows the promotion is not the satisfaction Andrew expected. Instead of the security of having arrived at the position he wanted, he finds that the position has simply moved the pressure closer. Before, the pressure was the pressure of wanting to get in. Now the pressure is the pressure of staying in, and the two are not the same thing. Staying in requires not just being good, but being good in the specific way Fletcher wants on the specific day Fletcher decides to evaluate it. And the standards shift without notice in a way that makes preparation almost impossible. Andrew practices harder. He practices until the skin on his hands breaks open, until the blood makes the drumsticks slick, until he has to wrap his hands and go back to practicing because stopping is not something he knows how to do anymore. There is a scene in this section of the film that deserves very careful attention, because it contains something the film never quite states explicitly, but makes completely visible. Fletcher brings in another drummer, a student named Ryan Connolly, and runs both Andrew and Ryan through a brutal extended audition for the core position, pushing them back and forth across hours of repetition, switching between them without pattern or explanation, demanding that each match a specific tempo, and then changing the tempo without warning. The audition goes on long past any reasonable limit. Andrew's hands are bleeding. Ryan is exhausted. Fletcher is calm, watching with the same expression he always wears, neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, simply observing the effect of what he is doing. And at the end of it, when both musicians have been reduced to a state of physical and emotional depletion that would be recognized anywhere outside this room as a form of harm, Fletcher makes his decision, and the scene moves on. What this scene reveals about the trap is something specific. Andrew, in the middle of that audition, is no longer playing music. He stopped playing music some time ago. What he is doing is something else, something that looks like music from the outside because it involves a drum kit and a pair of sticks and the physical movements of drumming, but that is actually a form of negotiation with Fletcher's judgment, an attempt to produce whatever combination of sound and effort and endurance will cause Fletcher to choose him rather than Ryan. The music has become instrumental in the most literal sense, a means to an end. And the end is not artistic or expressive or communicative. The end is Fletcher's approval. The end is being chosen. And Andrew is willing to bleed for it, not because he loves the music enough to bleed for it, but because the alternative, not being chosen, has become psychologically unthinkable. This is the moment the trap is fully closed. Not the initial selection, not the first rehearsal, not even the first time Fletcher throws something at Andrew's head. The trap closes when Andrew realizes, somewhere in the middle of that extended audition, that he no longer has the capacity to walk away from this. That the possibility of leaving, of deciding that this room and this man and this particular form of suffering are not what he signed up for, has quietly ceased to be available to him. He cannot leave because leaving would mean relinquishing the position he has bled for. And relinquishing the position would mean accepting that the bleeding was for nothing. And accepting that the bleeding was for nothing would mean confronting the possibility that the framework he has organized his entire identity around, the framework in which suffering leads to greatness and Fletcher is the instrument of transformation, is not a reliable map of reality. He cannot do that. He is too far in. The sunk cost of everything he has already given, the hours and the relationships and the skin off his hands, has made the exit more expensive than continuing, even though continuing is destroying him. Chazelle shoots the audition sequence with an editing rhythm that mimics the psychological experience of the scene rather than simply documenting it. The cuts are fast, almost disorienting, jumping between Andrew and Ryan and Fletcher in a pattern that refuses to let the audience settle into any comfortable observation point. The sound design amplifies the drums until they fill the entire audio space, crowding out everything else, so that the experience of watching becomes slightly aggressive, slightly too much, which is precisely the experience Andrew is having in the room. The film is not letting the audience watch the scene from a safe distance. It is putting the audience inside the pressure, making the extended duration of the audition felt rather than simply observed. By the time Fletcher makes his decision and the scene ends, the audience has been in that room long enough to understand, viscerally rather than intellectually, why Andrew cannot leave. The selection also does something to Andrew's understanding of his own talent that the film tracks carefully across the scenes that follow. Before Fletcher, Andrew had a reasonably stable sense of what he was capable of. He knew he was good. He suspected he might be very good. He had a private confidence in his own potential that was part of what drove him to the empty hallways and the late-night practice sessions. After Fletcher, that private confidence is gone. Not because Fletcher has told him he is bad, but because Fletcher has replaced Andrew's internal measure with an external one. The standard now lives in Fletcher's expression, in the almost imperceptible signals of satisfaction or dissatisfaction that Andrew has become expert at reading. Andrew no longer knows if he is playing well unless Fletcher's face tells him. He has outsourced the faculty of self-evaluation to the person who is least likely to use it in his interest. And the outsourcing happened so gradually, through so many small interactions in that rehearsal room, that Andrew cannot identify the moment it occurred. He simply finds himself, one day, unable to assess his own playing without reference to what Fletcher might think of it. This is the psychological core of what the audition set in motion, and it matters for everything the film does afterward. Andrew is not simply a student being pushed hard by a demanding teacher. He is a young person whose sense of self has become so entangled with the judgment of a specific authority figure that the two can no longer be separated without damage to both. He needs Fletcher's approval in the way that people need things when need has stopped being a preference and become a structural feature, of how they experience themselves. Removing Fletcher from the equation at this point would not liberate Andrew. It would leave him without the instrument he has been using to understand who he is. The film knows this. It builds toward the moment when Fletcher is removed from Andrew's life, when the testimony and the lawsuit and the expulsion produce the outcome they produce. And then it watches what happens to Andrew in the absence of the framework. What happens is not freedom. What happens is a young man sitting at a drum kit in his childhood home, not playing, looking at the instrument that used to organize his experience of being alive, and finding that without the context of Fletcher's judgment, it has become almost meaningless. The trap, once entered, does not release its occupant simply because the door is opened. The trap has become the architecture of Andrew's inner life. Walking out of it is not a matter of choosing to leave. It is a matter of rebuilding, from scratch, a way of knowing who you are that does not depend on being chosen. Andrew is not ready to do that. He will not be ready to do it for a long time. And in the meantime, the film has one more act to play. One more encounter between the student and the teacher that will reveal, finally and completely, who each of them actually is. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The audition closed the trap, and the rehearsal room tightened it. But a trap only reveals its full dimensions when the person inside it tries to leave. The next part of Andrew's story is about what he gave up trying to stay, and what the giving up actually cost. Section 5. What gets sacrificed? Nicole, family, and the cost of the single path. There is a scene early in Whiplash where Andrew asks a girl out. Her name is Nicole. She works at the concession stand of a movie theater near the conservatory, and Andrew has noticed her in the way that 19-year-olds notice people they find beautiful, with a combination of genuine feeling and performed casualness that is both transparent and endearing. The exchange is awkward in a very specific way. Andrew is not socially incapable. He is not the kind of movie character whose genius at one thing is explained by total incompetence at everything else. He is simply young and slightly nervous, and genuinely interested in this particular person. And the conversation has the texture of two people in their late teens trying to communicate something real to each other, while protecting themselves from the vulnerability of communicating it too directly. Nicole says yes. They go on a date. They talk about movies and family and small things, and Andrew is present in a way he is rarely present outside of a practice room. He laughs. He listens. He seems, briefly, like a person whose entire inner world is not organized around a drum kit and the approval of a terrifying authority figure. Then, he breaks up with her. He does it in a scene that is one of the most quietly devastating in the film. Not because of any dramatic violence in it, but because of the quality of reasoning Andrew uses, the specific architecture of the justification he has constructed for doing something that is clearly causing him pain. He tells Nicole, in a conversation that she has not seen coming and that lands on her with a blankness that slowly becomes hurt, that he cannot be in a relationship right now, that the relationship will become a source of resentment, that he will resent her when he is tired and struggling and needs to practice, that he will resent her for the time she takes, the attention she requires, the simple human obligation of being present to another person that a relationship involves. He tells her this with a directness that is almost clinical, as though he has thought it through carefully and arrived at a logical conclusion, as though the feelings visible on her face are a data point he has already factored into an equation that has come out clearly on one side. Nicole asks him if he is not already great. It is a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. She has seen him play. She knows he is good. She is asking whether the level he is already at might be sufficient. whether the pursuit that is about to consume everything else in his life is being undertaken in service of a destination that might already have been reached. Andrew's answer is the most revealing thing he says in the entire film. He tells her he wants to be one of the greats. Not great, one of the greats. The distinction matters enormously. Great is a description of quality, a word that describes what the music is. One of the greats is a position in a ranking, a place in history, a designation that requires not just excellence, but a specific relationship to everyone else who has ever been excellent. What Andrew wants is not to play beautifully. What Andrew wants is to be undeniable in a way that is measured against the entire history of jazz drumming and found to be among the best that history contains. Nicole cannot give him that. Nothing about being in a relationship with Nicole moves him closer to that, and so Nicole has to go. The breakup scene is shot simply, without musical score, without the editing urgency that characterizes the rehearsal sequences. Giselle lets it sit in natural light and relative quiet, which makes it feel like the film momentarily stepping outside its own intensity to show the audience what the intensity is costing at the level of ordinary human life. The rehearsal room sequences are, in their way, exciting. The drumming is exciting. Even the scenes of humiliation carry a kind of horrible energy that keeps the audience's attention fully engaged. The breakup is not exciting. It is flat and sad, and very recognizable as the kind of conversation that happens when a person has decided that another person does not fit inside the life they are building, and the person being told this has not yet understood that the decision was made before the conversation began. Nicole listens to Andrew explain his reasoning. She does not argue with it. There is nothing to argue with, because the reasoning is not actually about her. It is about Andrew, and about the version of his future that he has decided Nicole does not belong in. She leaves. The scene ends. The film goes back to the rehearsal room. What makes this sacrifice legible as a sacrifice, rather than simply a choice, is the brief moment before Andrew delivers his explanation, where something in his face suggests that he knows what he is doing and does not fully want to do it. He is not cold in this scene. He is not indifferent to Nicole or to the relationship. He seems, in the seconds before he begins speaking, like a person who has made a decision he will not revisit, and who is in the process of paying the first installment of a cost he has decided is acceptable. The cost is real. He is not pretending it is not. He is simply calculating that what he is moving toward is worth more than what he is moving away from. And the calculation, as the film will eventually make clear, is based on a set of assumptions about what the pursuit will produce that are not entirely reliable. Nicole disappears from the film for a long stretch after this, and her absence is itself a form of presence. The rehearsal room fills the space she occupied. Fletcher fills the space she occupied. The practice sessions that extend past midnight, the hands wrapped in cloth, the singular focus on tempo and technique, and the ever-receding standard of Fletcher's approval. All of this fills the space that a relationship with another person might have occupied. And the filling is so complete that it is easy, while watching, to forget that the space existed at all. This is, the film suggests, part of the danger. The pursuit does not feel like deprivation from the inside. It feels like clarity. It feels like the removal of everything that was cluttering the path to the thing that actually matters. What looks like loss from the outside registers internally as focus, and the two experiences are so different that the person undergoing them and the people watching them are essentially watching different events. The family dinner described in the previous section belongs to this same territory of sacrifice. Though it works differently, because the loss there is not of a relationship Andrew has chosen to end, but of a kind of belonging he did not know he was leaving until he was already gone. The dinner is a gathering of people who love Andrew in the uncomplicated way that families love people. Because he is theirs. Because he has always been there. Because the fact of him is reason enough. His father loves him this way. The cousins and aunts and uncles love him this way. And Andrew, sitting at the table, is no longer able to fully receive this kind of love because it is not calibrated to the standard he is now operating under. The love on offer at the family dinner does not know anything about Schaefer Conservatory or Fletcher's band, or the difference between being a good drummer and being one of the greats. It cannot tell the difference, and its inability to tell the difference has made it, for Andrew, almost useless as a form of nourishment. This is one of the more painful dynamics the film traces. Andrew does not stop loving his father. There is a tenderness in the scenes between them, even in this dinner scene, that is genuine and that the film does not undercut. His father is a person Andrew respects and feels warmly toward. A person who introduced him to movies and books and the kind of thoughtful engagement with art that probably planted some of the seeds of Andrew's own obsession. But the father represents something Andrew is moving away from. A life of modest aspiration and genuine contentment. Of loving things deeply without needing to be the best at them. Of finding meaning in the quality of the experience, rather than the position of the experiencer in some historical ranking. Andrew cannot afford to find that model attractive right now. It is too close to the alternative he is refusing. Looking at his father's life with genuine appreciation would require him to consider the possibility that a life without the singular obsessive drive he is currently living by might also be a valid and even beautiful life. He cannot consider that possibility. It would cost him everything. The father watches Andrew at the dinner table with an expression that the film holds just long enough to register. It is not quite worry and not quite pride. It is the expression of a person who can see something happening to someone they love and cannot find the language for what they are seeing, cannot locate it in any category of parental experience that tells them what to do. He knows Andrew is different than he was a year ago. He knows the conservatory has changed something. He does not yet have the information to understand that what has changed is not just Andrew's musical development, but his fundamental orientation toward other people, his capacity to let them matter to him, his willingness to be known by them in the ordinary ways that human beings know each other. The father will not understand this fully until the very end of the film, in the moment before Andrew goes back to the drum kit for the final performance. When the father's face registers something that looks, on close examination, much more like grief than pride. Andrew ends his relationship with Nicole in the section of the film devoted to his push to become the core drummer, and the timing is not incidental. The relationship and the position are in direct competition for the same resource, which is Andrew's attention. And in the framework Andrew is operating under, attention is not something that can be divided without loss. Fletcher has made this explicit in the rehearsal room, in ways both direct and indirect, through the simple mechanism of demanding everything and making clear that anything less than everything will be noticed and penalized. A student who leaves rehearsal to attend to a personal life is a student who is not serious. A musician who prioritizes a relationship over practice is a musician who has revealed something disqualifying about what they actually want. These messages are never stated as policies. They do not need to be. They are encoded in the atmosphere of the rehearsal room, in the way Fletcher responds to any evidence that his musicians have an existence outside of music. in the contempt that flickers briefly across his face when a student mentions something that suggests they have been spending time on anything other than the thing Fletcher considers the only thing worth spending time on. Nicole reappears near the end of the film, and Andrew calls her. He has been expelled from Schaefer by this point. He has been away from Fletcher and away from the conservatory and away from the framework that organized his life. And in that absence, he has become aware of what the framework cost him in the specific, textured way that people become aware of losses when the thing that made the losses feel acceptable is no longer present. He calls Nicole. She meets him, and she tells him, simply and without drama, that she has a boyfriend now, that she has moved on. The information lands on Andrew with a quietness that says something important about where he is emotionally at this point in the film. He does not argue. He does not express surprise. He simply receives the information and sits with it. And what his face shows is not the specific hurt of romantic rejection, but something larger and more diffuse. The recognition that the exchange he made, Nicole for the pursuit, was an exchange he cannot reverse, and that the pursuit, at the moment he is sitting across from her, has not yet produced the thing he traded her for. He is no longer in Fletcher's band. He is no longer at Schaefer. He is not, at this particular moment, one of the greats. He is a young man sitting across from a girl he liked, who has moved on because he told her to. And the thing he told her he was choosing over her has so far produced mainly bleeding hands, and a humiliation on a competition stage, and an expulsion from the only institution that was going to give him access to the level he was reaching for. The sacrifice has not yet paid off. The cost is fully real, but the return is still theoretical. And Andrew, sitting across from Nicole in this quiet scene, is experiencing the gap between those two facts with a clarity that the rehearsal room's constant urgency did not allow. Chazelle includes this scene not to produce sympathy for Andrew as a romantic figure, but to show the audience what single-minded ambition looks like in the moments when it is not working, when the pursuit is temporarily stalled, and the things surrendered in service of it are visible in the foreground rather than the background. The scene with Nicole is the emotional equivalent of a pause in the drumming, a moment of silence in which everything that the drumming has been drowning out can suddenly be heard. What can be heard is the cost. The relationship that ended before it had the chance to become something. The family dinners, attended in body but not in spirit. The version of Andrew who might have sat at a table with people who loved him and let their love be enough. Who might have found meaning in ordinary connection and ordinary warmth. The version who was always available as an alternative and who Andrew chose every day not to be. That version does not return at the end of the film. The final sequence does not show Andrew rediscovering his capacity for ordinary human connection, or returning to the relationships he sacrificed. It shows him at a drum kit, playing with everything he has, in front of an audience, with Fletcher conducting. The sacrifice, as it turns out, was not a temporary condition of the pursuit. It was the pursuit itself. What Andrew traded Nicole and the family dinners and the ordinary texture of a life in relationship with other people for was not a destination he was moving toward. It was a way of being that required the trading to continue indefinitely, that was constituted by the trading, that would stop being itself the moment he stopped giving things up. This is what the film means when it shows Andrew's father's face at the end of the final performance. Not pride in what his son has achieved. Something closer to the recognition that the son he raised is somewhere inside that performance. But the distance between that son and the figure at the drum kit has been growing for 2 years and is now very large, and no amount of applause from the audience is going to close it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every sacrifice Andrew made was made in the currency of ordinary life. The relationships and warmth and simple belonging that most people treat as the foundation of a livable existence. What he received in exchange was pressure and blood. And the question of whether the blood was evidence of dedication or evidence of something going wrong is the question the next section of the film makes impossible to avoid. Section 6. Blood on the drumhead. The body as a measure of obsession. There is a shot in Whiplash that lasts only a few seconds and that most people who have seen the film remember without being able to say exactly when it occurs or what surrounds it. Andrew is playing. He has been playing for a long time, longer than any reasonable practice session should last. In the specific, driven way he plays when he is not practicing music so much as punishing himself toward a standard he cannot quite reach. And the camera moves down from his face, which is concentrated and set and showing no particular distress, to his hands, which are bleeding. Not dramatically bleeding, not in the way of a movie injury designed to produce alarm. Bleeding in the quiet, almost matter-of-fact way of skin that has been subjected to sustained friction past the point where it can hold itself together. The drumsticks are red at the tips where his hands have been gripping them. The drumhead has small dark marks on it where the blood has transferred. Andrew does not stop. The camera holds on the hands for a moment and then the film moves on. And Andrew keeps playing. And the bleeding is simply a fact of the scene, a detail of the environment rather than a crisis requiring response. This shot is doing something very precise. It is locating the film's central argument not in dialogue or in the relationship between Andrew and Fletcher or in the mythology of Charlie Parker, but in the body. In the specific, physical, undeniable fact of a young man's hands coming apart under the pressure of what he is demanding of them. The blood is not a symbol in the literary sense, not a device the film has inserted to represent something else. It is evidence. It is the body's record of what has been happening, written in the most legible language the body has available. And the film asks the audience to look at it with the same directness that Andrew refuses to look at it with. He does not look at his hands when they bleed. He wraps them in cloth and goes back to playing. The blood is an inconvenience in his framework, a logistical problem to be managed rather than a signal to be interpreted. The film disagrees. The film insists that the blood means something, and it structures the physical sequences of Andrew's story to make that meaning accumulate across the entire running time until the final performance, when the body's testimony and the film's testimony arrive at the same place simultaneously. Damien Chazelle made a decision early in the production of Whiplash that Miles Teller would do the overwhelming majority of the drumming himself. Teller, who had played drums since he was 15, underwent months of intensive training before filming began, working with professional drummers to develop the specific technical facility that the role required. The decision was not simply a matter of authenticity, though it contributed enormously to the authenticity of the performance. It was a thematic decision. The camera's ability to stay close to Teller's hands, to move between his face and his body without the editing cut that would have been required if a double were playing, means that the physical experience of the drumming is never at a remove from the emotional experience of it. When Andrew is in pain, the audience can see it in the same frame as the drumming. When the drumming produces the pain, the cause and the effect exist together in the same image. The body and the music are inseparable because Teller made them inseparable, and the inseparability is the point. The blisters appear early, before the bleeding, before any of the extreme physical consequences that the later sections of the film produce. There are blisters. Andrew notices them between practice sessions, with the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of someone noting a minor change in the weather. He adjusts his grip slightly. He wraps the affected areas in tape or cloth and continues. The blisters are the body's first communication, the mildest version of the message it will spend the rest of the film trying to deliver. They say, in the body's available language, that something is being asked of this tissue that exceeds what the tissue was designed to provide. They are a request for modification, for rest, for the ordinary biological courtesy of allowing damage to repair before new damage is added on top of it. Andrew declines the request. The blisters become sores. The sores open. The bleeding begins. There is a scene where Andrew soaks his hands in a bucket of ice water before a rehearsal, standing over the bucket in the bathroom of the conservatory with an expression of grim concentration, as though the ice water is a problem to be solved rather than a symptom to be addressed. The scene is brief and almost throwaway in its placement, tucked between sequences of higher dramatic temperature, but it carries an enormous amount of information about where Andrew is at this point in the story. The ice water is not treatment, it is management. It is the minimum intervention required to make the hands functional enough to get through the next rehearsal, applied with no particular care for what comes after the next rehearsal. Andrew is not thinking about the long-term condition of his hands. He is thinking about the next time Fletcher will evaluate his playing, and whether the hands will be capable of producing what that evaluation will require. The body is being administered to in the same way that a machine might be administered to, with enough maintenance to keep it operational, and no more thought given to its well-being than that operational minimum requires. This is the central pathology the film is examining through the physical sequences, and it is a pathology that has a name in the psychological literature, even if the film never uses it. The body is being treated as an instrument rather than as a self. Andrew's relationship to his own physical experience has been restructured through the combined influence of his ambition and Fletcher's methodology into a relationship of pure instrumentality. The hands bleed because they are being used past their capacity, and the response to the bleeding is to find the fastest available method for restoring capacity, not to question whether the level of use is appropriate. The body is speaking, and the mind is translating its speech into logistics. The translation is so fluent and so automatic that Andrew no longer experiences it as a choice. He experiences it as simply what the situation requires. Chazelle has spoken about wanting the film to feel like a sports movie in certain structural ways, about the influence of sports dramas on how he conceived the rehearsal and practice sequences. The comparison is illuminating, but also slightly misleading. Sports films typically treat physical damage as evidence of heroism, as proof of the athlete's willingness to push through ordinary human limitation in service of a transcendent competitive goal. The bleeding hands in a conventional sports drama would be unambiguously heroic, a visual shorthand for dedication that the audience is expected to admire. Whiplash is doing something more complicated. It presents the bleeding hands with enough visual directness to make them feel significant, but it surrounds them with enough contextual information to make their meaning genuinely uncertain. Is this heroism or harm? Is Andrew's willingness to bleed for his art a mark of his seriousness? Or is it a mark of something that has gone wrong in his relationship to himself and to the music? The film does not answer this question by showing the hands and then cutting to an approving face or an inspiring musical moment. It shows the hands and then shows Andrew going back to playing and leaves the question in the air for the audience to sit with. The question becomes much harder to sit with after the car crash. The crash is the film's most extreme physical event. the moment where the body's situation moves from the manageable discomfort of blisters and bleeding into the unambiguous territory of serious injury. Andrew's bus breaks down on the way to a competition. He rents a car, drives to retrieve drumsticks he has left behind, and on the way back to the concert hall is hit by a truck at an intersection. The car is badly damaged. Andrew is badly damaged. He has visible injuries, blood on his face and hands, the kind of physical shock that would send most people directly to the nearest available medical attention and away from any further plans for the day. He crawls out of the wreckage. A passerby tries to help him. He pushes the passerby away. He limps and staggers the distance to the concert hall, arrives during the performance, takes the stage, and begins to play. The crash sequence is shot and edited with a controlled ferocity that makes it one of the most viscerally uncomfortable things in the film. The sound design is particularly important here. The sudden silence after the impact, the ringing that replaces it. The gradual return of ambient sound in a way that mimics the physiological experience of recovering consciousness after a shock. Teller plays Andrew's disorientation with a specificity that suggests genuine research into what that state actually feels like. The gap between knowing intellectually that something serious has happened and being able to feel it clearly enough to respond to it appropriately. Andrew, in the moments after the crash, is not performing composure. He genuinely cannot fully process what has just happened to him, because the single track of his attention, get to the hall, get to the drums, do not let this be the reason you miss the performance, has overridden the processing. He is operating on the narrow bandwidth of obsession, which has no channel available for the information his body is trying to send him. When he arrives at the hall and takes the stage and begins to play, the performance is bad. Not subtly bad. Not the kind of bad that only a specialist would recognize, but visibly, audibly bad, in a way that Fletcher and the audience can hear immediately. His hands are not capable of what he is asking them to do. The injuries from the crash have compounded the existing damage from the weeks of over-practice. And the result is a drummer who is present on stage, but not capable of the performance the stage requires. Fletcher stops the performance. He removes Andrew from the drum kit with the cold efficiency of someone solving a problem rather than addressing a person. And Andrew, whose body has just been through a car crash, and whose hands are bleeding onto the drum heads, and who is probably in more physical pain than he is consciously registering, attacks Fletcher. He tackles him on the stage, in front of the audience and the band, in an outburst that is less a decision than a physiological event, the body finally producing a response that the mind has been suppressing for weeks. The attack is important because of what it reveals about where the energy of Andrew's obsession has been going. The sustained practice, the bleeding, the sacrifice of Nicole and the family dinners, the ice water and the wrapping, and the relentless management of the body's protests, all of it has been held in a state of controlled direction, aimed at the drum kit and at Fletcher's standard. The attack on Fletcher is what happens when that control breaks. When the body that has been administered to instrumentally for months produces an output that the instrument's operator did not choose and cannot immediately stop. Andrew is not choosing to attack Fletcher in the sense that a person chooses actions they have deliberated about. He is at the end of a process of physical and psychological compression that has found its release in the only direction that was not walled off by his own framework. He cannot direct the energy at himself, because his framework tells him that directing it inward is what practice is for. He cannot direct it at the music, because the music has been taken away. Fletcher is the only available target, and so Fletcher receives it. The expulsion that follows is, in purely practical terms, the consequence of the attack. But in the deeper logic of the film, it is also a consequence of the body's rebellion. Andrew's hands, pushed past their capacity for months, finally produced an output that his mind could not control. And the output cost him the position he had bled for. The body, which had been trying to communicate something for a long time, through blisters and blood and the physiological shock of a car crash, finally communicated it in a language too loud to be managed with ice water and cloth. The expulsion is the body winning an argument that Andrew had been refusing to have. The period after the expulsion is the film's quietest physical passage, and its quietness is itself significant. Andrew is not practicing. He is not bleeding. His hands, given rest for the first time in months, are presumably healing. He is sitting in his childhood home, moving through days that do not have the structure of the conservatory's demands, eating meals and sleeping at ordinary hours, and doing the things that people do when their lives are not organized around a single consuming pursuit. He looks, in these scenes, like someone recovering from an illness, not dramatically unwell, not visibly suffering in the way the rehearsal room produced visible suffering, but quieter than he was, and somehow less defined, as though the obsession that had given his movements a particular quality of purposefulness has been removed, and what remains is the ordinary young man underneath it, who is not entirely sure what to do with himself without the framework the obsession provided. This is the film's most honest portrait of what the body actually needs, and it places it in deliberate contrast with everything that preceded it. The hands that were bleeding are now at rest. The body that was being driven past its limits is now being allowed to operate within them. And the film observes this with a quality of attention that suggests it is not indifferent to the difference, that it can see the value of what the rest offers, even as it understands that Andrew cannot. For Andrew, the rest feels like failure. It feels like the absence of the thing that made his life mean something. He does not experience the healing of his hands as restoration. He experiences it as evidence that he is no longer doing what he was put here to do. The final performance reverses all of this. Andrew at the drum kit in the last scene of the film is bleeding again by the end of it. The camera finds his hands in the same way it found them in the early practice sequences. The same blood on the drumsticks, the same dark marks on the drumhead. The body is back in the same condition the obsession always produces. But this time, the film places the bleeding inside a performance of genuine musical power, inside a sequence that is undeniably thrilling in its execution, inside a moment that Fletcher's nod acknowledges as the arrival of something real. The question the film has been building toward is answered here, in the most ambiguous possible way. The blood is back. The music is extraordinary. The cost and the achievement exist in the same frame, inseparable, the way they have always been in this story, and the film ends without telling the audience which one to look at. That refusal to direct the gaze is the most honest thing Whiplash does. The blood is real. The music is real. The question of whether one justifies the other is left exactly where it belongs, which is with every person watching, and with every person who has ever wanted something badly enough to let it cost them something they probably should have kept. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The body kept the record of what the obsession cost, in blisters and blood, and the shock of a crash that Andrew walked away from because walking away from it was the only option his framework allowed. There was another record being kept elsewhere, belonging to a student the film never shows in full, whose absence sits in the background of every rehearsal scene like a question Fletcher hopes nobody will think to ask. Section 7. Sean Casey. The shadow the film never forgets. There is a moment in a rehearsal session, somewhere in the middle of Whiplash, that the film stages with a degree of emotional care that is unusual given the scene's apparent simplicity. Fletcher stops the band. He does it the way he always stops the band, with a single gesture and a quality of stillness that communicates that whatever was happening musically is now less important than whatever he is about to say. The musicians lower their instruments. The room goes quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when Fletcher is about to speak, with a quality of attention that is partly respect and partly the specific alertness of people who have learned that anything can happen in the silence before Fletcher fills it. And then Fletcher tells them, in a voice that is noticeably quieter than his rehearsal voice, that a former student of his has died. A trumpeter named Sean Casey. He died, Fletcher says, in a car accident. He was one of the most talented musicians Fletcher had ever worked with. He was, in Fletcher's words, the kind of player who comes along once in a generation. Fletcher then does something that the film presents as a gesture of grief, and that the audience, at this point in the story, receives as such. He plays a recording of Sean Casey playing. The music that comes out of the speaker is genuinely beautiful. It is the kind of trumpet playing that has a quality of inevitability to it, each note arriving exactly where it should. The phrasing open and confident and full of the specific warmth that the best jazz playing carries. The band listens. Several musicians are visibly moved. Andrew is visibly moved. Fletcher himself stands with his eyes slightly lowered, in the posture of a person remembering someone they cared about. And the room holds the moment with the kind of collective stillness that genuine grief produces in groups of people. None of this is what it appears to be. The car accident is a lie. Sean Casey did not die in a car accident. He died by suicide, after a period of depression and anxiety that his family and their lawyers would later argue was directly caused, or at minimum substantially worsened, by the sustained psychological abuse he experienced in Fletcher's rehearsal room. Fletcher knew this when he stood in front of the band and described a car accident. He knew it when he played the recording. He knew it when he accepted the quiet sympathy of the musicians around him, when he allowed the moment to register as a tribute to lost talent, rather than as what it actually was, which was a conductor standing in the room where one of his students had been broken, using that student's death as a motivational tool without disclosing the cause of it. The manipulation is so complete and so coldly executed that it takes a moment, on first viewing, to fully assemble what has happened. By the time the film reveals the truth, the audience has already been inside the lie long enough to feel the specific retrospective discomfort of having been moved by something constructed to move them. Sean Casey is never seen in Whiplash. He exists entirely as an absence, as a name and a piece of recorded music and a cause of death that is revealed in stages across the film's second half. He has no dialogue, no physical presence, no scenes of his own. He is a ghost in the most literal narrative sense, a character whose influence on the story is felt entirely through the effects of his not being there. And yet he is, in some important ways, the most important figure in the film after Andrew and Fletcher, because he is the answer to the question the film keeps asking without quite stating it directly. The question is not whether Fletcher's methods can produce a great musician. The film answers that in the affirmative through Andrew's development. The question is what Fletcher's methods produce in the musicians they do not make great. The ones who go through the rehearsal room and come out the other side not transformed, but damaged. Not like Andrew, but like Sean Casey. The information about Casey arrives in pieces, which is itself a structural choice worth examining. The film does not present the truth about him in a single revelation scene. It allows the lie to sit and do its work, allows the audience to carry the false version of the story for a significant portion of the running time, and then introduces the correction gradually, through the conversation between Andrew and the lawyer representing Casey's parents. The lawyer explains that Casey did not die in a car accident, that he had been suffering from depression and anxiety, that his family believes Fletcher's treatment of him contributed substantially to both, that they are pursuing legal action and want Andrew's anonymous testimony about what he witnessed in Fletcher's rehearsal room. The correction is delivered in a tone that is quiet and factual, the way lawyers deliver information, without the dramatic inflation that a movie might use to signal that something important has just been revealed. It is simply information. Casey is dead. He died by his own hand. Fletcher knew this. Fletcher lied. The effect of this correction on the film's entire preceding narrative is significant. Every scene in the rehearsal room, retrospectively, now contains Casey, not as a presence but as a possibility, as the demonstration of what the room can do to a person who does not have Andrew's particular combination of stubbornness and appetite and psychological makeup. Fletcher's rehearsal room did not produce Casey's death directly. The film is careful not to make a simplistic causal claim. What it suggests, through the legal framing and through the specificity of what Casey's family is alleging, is that the sustained psychological pressure of being in Fletcher's band, the public humiliation and the impossible standards, and the atmosphere of fear that pervades every session, created conditions in which a person already vulnerable to depression could not maintain the psychological resources required to survive. The rehearsal room did not kill Sean Casey, but it was the environment in which Sean Casey became someone who could not go on. Fletcher's decision to lie about the cause of Casey's death is the single most revealing thing the film shows about him, more revealing than any of the scenes of overt cruelty in the rehearsal room. The cruelty in the rehearsal room can be rationalized, and Fletcher does rationalize it, with the Parker mythology and the philosophy of necessary suffering, and the argument that the musicians who survive his methods are better for having survived them. The lie about Casey cannot be rationalized within that framework, because it is not an act of brutal instruction. It is an act of self-protection. Fletcher lied because the truth about how Casey died would have raised questions about his methods that the Parker mythology cannot answer. A student who becomes Charlie Parker confirms the theory. A student who dies by suicide after being broken in the rehearsal room does not confirm it, and does not disconfirm it in a way that Fletcher could simply absorb and move past. It constitutes a category of evidence that his framework has no place for, and so he removed it from the available evidence by replacing it with a car accident. And then he used the edited version of the story as a rehearsal room tool. The use of Casey's death as a motivational tool is worth dwelling on because it illustrates something specific about the structure of Fletcher's psychology that the more visible cruelties in the film do not quite reach. When Fletcher humiliates Andrew in the rehearsal room, when he throws things and shouts and reduces musicians to tears in front of their peers, he is performing power in a way that at least has a consistent internal logic, however twisted. The humiliation is designed to produce a response, to push the musician toward a level of performance that comfort would not produce. The manipulation is visible, and its purpose within Fletcher's framework is legible. The lie about Casey is different. It is not designed to push musicians toward better playing. It is designed to protect Fletcher from the consequences of his own methods. It is an act of self-interest dressed as tribute. And the dressing is so skillfully applied that the band accepts it without question. Andrew accepts it without question. The audience accepts it without question. At least for a while. Fletcher is not just a demanding teacher. He is a person who is capable of standing over a lie about the death of someone he was responsible for and performing grief convincingly enough to move a room full of people. That is a different kind of thing. What the film does with Casey's absence structurally is force the audience to do a kind of moral arithmetic that it cannot complete. Andrew, on one side of the ledger, is developing into a genuinely extraordinary drummer under Fletcher's instruction. The evidence of this accumulates across the film, in the visible improvement of his playing, in the scenes where the music itself communicates something that simple description cannot, in the final performance, where whatever Andrew has become is fully audible for the first time. This is the return on Fletcher's investment, the product that his philosophy points to as its justification. Casey, on the other side of the ledger, is dead. He was also a talented musician, talented enough that the recording Fletcher plays moves the room, talented enough that Fletcher himself calls him once in a generation. He went through the same rehearsal room. He encountered the same methods. He did not emerge transformed. He disappeared into the damage and did not come back. The film does not tell the audience how many Sean Caseys there are for every Andrew Neiman. It does not need to. The existence of one is sufficient to complicate the ledger in a way that cannot be resolved by pointing to Andrew's final performance, however extraordinary that performance is. Fletcher's philosophy, in its own terms, accounts for this. The people who break under the pressure were not going to be great anyway. Their breaking is evidence of a limitation that was always there, revealed by the pressure rather than created by it. This is the claim, and the film's response to the claim is not a counterargument delivered in dialogue. It is Sean Casey's recorded trumpet playing, filling the rehearsal room with music that is beautiful and confident and full of life. The music of a person who was, by every available measure, talented enough to matter, playing with a facility that the film presents as genuine, rather than as the inflated tribute of a grieving mentor. The music says that Casey had what it took. The fact of his death says that having what it took was not enough to survive what Fletcher's room asked of him. Andrew's decision to testify against Fletcher, made at his father's urging and executed anonymously through the lawyer, is the film's clearest moral statement about Casey's significance. Andrew does not testify because he has undergone a conversion experience about the ethics of Fletcher's methods. He testifies because his father, who loves him and who can see more clearly from the outside what the rehearsal room has been doing to his son, pushes him toward it. And Andrew, who has been expelled and is no longer inside the framework that made Fletcher's judgment the organizing principle of his inner life, finds that without the framework, the testimony is possible in a way it would not have been before. He agrees to tell the truth about what he witnessed. He does this quietly, without drama, with the specific flatness of a person doing something they know is right, but that costs them something they are not entirely sure they can afford to lose. What it costs him is the possibility of remaining in Fletcher's orbit. By testifying, even anonymously, Andrew is accepting that his relationship with Fletcher is over, that the path to greatness that ran through Fletcher's band is no longer available to him. That whatever he becomes as a musician, he will have to become without the specific, terrible instrument of Fletcher's instruction. This is a genuine sacrifice, understood as such by Andrew, even if he cannot fully articulate it at the time. He is not a principled whistleblower acting from a clear ethical position. He is a young man who is no longer inside the machine, and who, from outside it, can see Casey's death for what it actually is. And what it actually is, in Andrew's view from this distance, is sufficient reason to tell the truth to the people who are asking for it. The lawsuit costs Fletcher his position at Schaefer. He is dismissed. The machine stops. And the film then moves forward in time to show Andrew in the aftermath, no longer drumming, carrying the loss of the framework with the specific quality of emptiness that people carry when the organizing principle of their life has been removed without being replaced. He is not at peace. He is not free. He is simply outside the room, in the world that exists beyond Fletcher's band, trying to figure out what kind of person he is when the band is not defining him. The encounter at the jazz club, where Andrew finds Fletcher playing piano with a small ensemble in a modest venue, is the scene that reopens the question. Fletcher is diminished here, visibly. He is no longer at the front of a room full of frightened musicians. He is playing piano in a small club, wearing clothes that are not his usual rehearsal black, in a context that does not grant him the specific kind of power his position at Schaefer provided. He seems, in this setting, almost ordinary, almost approachable. And Andrew, watching him from across the bar, feels something that the film carefully does not name, but that the audience can recognize. He feels the pull. He feels the old framework reasserting itself. The part of him that was shaped inside Fletcher's rehearsal room recognizing its shaper, and responding with the conditioned response of a person who has been trained to organize themselves around a particular authority. Fletcher sees him. They talk. Fletcher offers Andrew a spot in his new band, performing at the JVC Jazz Festival. And Andrew, who testified against him, who helped end his career at Schaefer, who watched the framework collapse and lived in the collapse for months, says yes. Casey is present in this moment too, in the way he is present in every moment of the film's second half, as the fact that Andrew is choosing to set aside in order to walk back into the room. The testimony has been given. The legal process has run its course. Andrew has done the thing that acknowledged what Casey's death meant and what Fletcher's methods cost. And then he has done the thing anyway, accepted the invitation, prepared for the performance, because the pull of the framework is stronger than the acknowledgement of its cost. And because Andrew Neiman, at 19 years old, does not yet have another way of understanding what he is supposed to do with the thing he is. Casey remains the question the film cannot answer and does not try to. He remains the figure in the background of the final performance, the other outcome, the demonstration that the room produces different results in different people, and that the results it produces in the people it breaks are not recoverable by pointing to the results it produces in the people it transforms. The music Andrew plays at the end of the film is extraordinary. It is also true that Sean Casey is dead. The film holds both of these facts in the same frame and refuses to resolve the tension between them, because the tension is the truth, and the truth does not resolve. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Casey's shadow falls across every frame of the final act, but the film still has one more turn to make before it can arrive at the ending. And that turn involves a betrayal, a trap set inside an invitation, and the question of what Andrew does when he finally understands, completely and without ambiguity, that Fletcher has been playing a different game than the one Andrew thought they were both playing. Section 8. The Betrayal. Testimony, disgrace, and the moment it all falls apart. There is something worth sitting with in the timing of Fletcher's invitation. Andrew has been away from Schaefer for months by the point they encounter each other at the jazz club. He has stopped drumming. He has given his testimony. He has watched the legal process remove Fletcher from the institution that gave Fletcher his power. And he has lived in the quiet aftermath of all of that, in the subdued shapelessness of days without the conservatory's structure to organize them. He is not healed. He is not at peace with what happened, or with who he became inside it. But he is outside it, and the outside has given him enough distance to begin, tentatively and without much clarity, to see the shape of what the inside actually was. And then Fletcher appears across a bar, and the distance collapses almost immediately. Because the distance was never as stable as the months of quiet made it seem. It was always provisional. It was always waiting for the specific stimulus that would reveal how provisional it was. Fletcher is that stimulus. The invitation he extends is not an offer of employment. It is a test of how thoroughly the framework he built inside Andrew has survived the period of Andrew's absence from it. Fletcher's manner at the jazz club is calibrated with a precision that the film presents without commentary, trusting the audience to read what is happening beneath the surface of the conversation. He is warm. He is reflective. He speaks about music with the genuine passion that has always been the most convincing thing about him, the quality that makes his philosophy feel like something more than rationalization for cruelty. He tells Andrew that he knows Andrew testified against him. He does not say this with anger. He says it with the tone of a person who has processed something difficult and arrived at a place of equanimity about it, which is itself a performance designed to make Andrew feel that the testimony has been forgiven, that what exists between them now is something cleaner and more mutual than what existed in the rehearsal room. He tells Andrew that the band he is putting together for the JVC Jazz Festival needs a drummer. He tells Andrew the set list will include pieces Andrew knows well from his time at Schaefer. He makes the invitation sound like an opportunity and a reconciliation simultaneously. And Andrew, who wants both of those things more than he has words for, accepts. The trap is already fully assembled at this point. Fletcher knows Andrew testified. Fletcher has decided that the appropriate response to this testimony is not forgiveness or equanimity, but revenge, delivered in the most public available setting, using the specific instrument of Andrew's ambition against him. The warmth at the jazz club, the apparent generosity of the invitation, the reassurance about the set list, all of it is construction. Fletcher is building a context in which Andrew will feel safe enough to be fully exposed, will commit completely to the performance, will stand in front of a prestigious audience at a major jazz festival with his entire self invested in what is about to happen. And then, Fletcher will remove the floor. The mechanism of the removal is elegant in its cruelty. At the festival, before Andrew takes the stage, Fletcher leans in and tells him quietly that he knows it was Andrew who testified. The warmth is gone. What replaces it is not rage, which would be easier to process, but something colder and more considered. The expression of a person who has been planning this moment and is now watching it arrive exactly as planned. He tells Andrew that the band is going to open with a piece called Upswingin', a Tim Simonek composition that Andrew has never played, has never rehearsed, has no sheet music for, and no preparation toward. The set list Andrew was promised, the pieces he knows inside out, will not be played. Andrew will stand at the drum kit in front of the JVC audience, in front of industry figures whose attention could shape a career, and he will have nothing. No preparation, no music, no ground under him. Fletcher will conduct. The band will play. And Andrew will be exposed as someone who does not belong there, publicly and permanently, in the setting that was supposed to be his return. Andrew walks onto the stage, and the performance begins, and it is exactly as bad as the setup guaranteed it would be. He does not know the piece. He cannot fake knowing it. He falls behind and loses the thread, and the music comes apart in the specific way that music comes apart when the drummer is not anchored in the material. And the audience can hear it, and Fletcher can hear it, and Andrew can hear it, and the hearing is its own form of destruction. He stops. He walks off stage. The humiliation is complete. Fletcher watches him go with the expression of a person who has accomplished what they set out to accomplish. And the expression contains something that is almost satisfaction, but that the film is careful to shade with enough ambiguity that it cannot be read as simple vindication. Fletcher is not happy. He is resolved. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Andrew's father is waiting in the wings. He has come to watch his son perform, and what he has watched instead is his son walk off a stage in front of a full house after failing publicly in the most visible way available. He opens his arms. Andrew walks into them. The embrace is genuine, and the father's face in it is the face of a person who loves his child without condition, who is not calculating the cost of the failure or measuring it against any standard of what the son was supposed to become. He is simply there, holding his son, in the way that parents hold children when children have been hurt and need to be held. It is the warmest human moment in the film, and it lasts approximately 4 seconds before Andrew pulls away. The pulling away is the turn. Andrew steps back from his father's arms, and something in his face changes. The humiliation is still there, fully present. But something has moved beneath it. Something that the film has been building toward across the entire running time, and that arrives here without announcement. Andrew turns back toward the stage. He walks back out. He sits down at the drum kit. Fletcher, who has continued conducting, turns and sees him. And for a moment, the film holds on Fletcher's face with the question of what this means, what Andrew is doing, whether this is a further humiliation in the making or something else. Andrew looks at the band. He counts them in. He begins to play Caravan, the piece he knows completely, the piece that has been the measure of his development across the entire film. And he plays it at a tempo and with a command that overrides everything Fletcher is trying to conduct, pulling the band into his rhythm rather than Fletcher's, seizing the performance from the person who assembled it as a trap and turning it into something that was not part of the plan. The betrayal, it turns out, runs in both directions. Fletcher betrayed Andrew by constructing an invitation designed to destroy him. And Andrew, in walking back onto that stage and taking over the performance without permission, betrays Fletcher's control of the situation in the only way available to him, which is by being too good to be ignored. The band follows Andrew because Andrew is playing with a command that makes following him the only musical option. Fletcher, furious, has a choice. He can stop the performance and expose the chaos to the audience, which would damage him as much as Andrew. Or he can conduct, can shape what Andrew has started, can find within the performance Andrew has seized something worth conducting. He chooses the second option. He raises his hands. He follows Andrew's lead. And in doing so, he participates in the thing Andrew has wrested from him, becomes a collaborator in a performance he intended as a punishment. And the film holds this reversal with the same quality of moral ambiguity it has held everything else. The question of who wins this exchange is not one the film resolves cleanly. Andrew has taken the stage back. He has demonstrated, in the most public possible setting, that he is not the person Fletcher tried to make him in that moment of betrayal, not someone who can be broken by the removal of the floor. But the demonstration required him to walk back into the room, to re-enter the relationship with Fletcher that the testimony was supposed to close, to give Fletcher one more opportunity to shape what he becomes. The pulling away from his father's arms is the moment that makes this choice visible as a choice, because the father's arms were the alternative. the ordinary human warmth of a life lived in relationship rather than in pursuit. And Andrew stepped out of them deliberately to go back to the drum kit. The framework survived the betrayal. The pull survived the exposure of the trap. Andrew is still inside the room, even as he appears to be taking it over. Fletcher leans in during the performance and whispers that he knows it was Andrew who testified. Andrew keeps playing. Whatever the whisper was meant to do, whatever final destabilization Fletcher intended it to produce, Andrew absorbs it and continues. And Fletcher, watching him continue, nods. The nod is the most debated gesture in the film, carrying different weights depending on which reading of the ending the audience brings to it. It can be read as genuine respect, as the moment Fletcher finally sees in Andrew what he has been looking for. It can be read as the acknowledgement of a worthy opponent, the recognition that Andrew has beaten him at his own game. It can be read as something more complicated and more troubling, as Fletcher taking credit for what Andrew has become, seeing in Andrew's refusal to be broken the product of his own methods, vindicating himself through the very act of defiance Andrew is performing against him. The film allows all of these readings simultaneously and does not adjudicate between them, because the ambiguity is not a failure of resolution, but the resolution itself. The betrayal did not break Andrew. It also did not free him. It produced a performance. And the question of whether a performance, however extraordinary, is sufficient return for everything that was paid to produce it, is the question the film carries into its final section. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The trap was set, and Andrew walked back into it anyway. And what came out of the trap was the most extraordinary playing of his life. Whether that exchange makes sense, whether the cost and the return belong in the same ledger at all, is what the final performance and everything after it is really asking. Section 9. The final performance. What the ending is actually saying. There is a moment near the end of the drum solo in Caravan where Andrew looks up. He has been locked in the playing for several minutes by this point, deep inside the music in a way the film has not shown him being inside it before. And the looking up is not a check on Fletcher, or a scan of the audience, or any of the self-referential monitoring that characterized his playing in the rehearsal room. It is something closer to the involuntary movement of a person who has been underwater for a long time and has just broken the surface. His eyes go wide for a fraction of a second. His face opens in a way that is different from concentration, and different from the desperate endurance of the rehearsal sequences, and different from the aggressive performance of capability that the earlier sections of the final piece contained. Something is happening in the playing that Andrew did not plan and did not pursue, and did not produce through the application of will. Something arrived, and the fraction of a second in which his face registers its arrival is the most honest moment in the film. Damien Chazelle has been direct in interviews about what he believes the ending of Whiplash means and what he believes it does not mean. He has said that Andrew achieves genuine artistic greatness in the final performance, that the playing is real and the achievement is real, and the film is not presenting it ironically or undermining it through context. He has also said that Andrew will be, following the events of the film, a sad and empty person, that the trajectory he is on leads somewhere dark, that the director's own view of the ending is not triumphant, but tragic. These two statements exist in genuine tension with each other, and Chazelle has never resolved the tension because he believes it should not be resolved, because the tension is the ending. The greatness is real. The cost is real. The film refuses to tell the audience which one to weigh more heavily, and the refusal is not evasion. It is the most honest position available to a film that has spent its entire running time examining a question that does not have a clean answer. The final performance is shot differently from everything that preceded it. The editing, which throughout the film has used rapid cuts and close framings to create urgency and pressure, opens up in the drum solo into longer takes that allow the playing to breathe, that give the audience time inside the music rather than inside the tension surrounding it. The camera moves between Andrew's hands and Andrew's face and the faces of the audience, and Fletcher's conducting with a quality of attention that feels less like surveillance, less like the monitoring that characterized the rehearsal room sequences, and more like witness. The film is watching something happen, rather than recording the conditions under which something is being forced to happen. The distinction is significant. For the first time in Whiplash, the music is not primarily evidence of a psychological dynamic between Andrew and Fletcher. It is simply music, playing itself out in a room full of people who are listening to it. And the listening matters in a way that the rehearsal room's listening never quite did. Fletcher's nod arrives near the end of the solo. Andrew is deep in an improvised passage, playing something that was not in the arrangement and was not rehearsed and could not have been prepared for, because it is emerging from the specific conditions of this particular performance in this particular room at this particular moment. Fletcher watches it happen, with an expression the film holds long enough to require interpretation. The nod, when it comes, is small. It is not the theatrical approval of a teacher rewarding a student for meeting a standard. It is the acknowledgement of one musician by another, which is a different thing entirely, and which the film has been waiting the entire running time to show. In this moment, and perhaps only in this moment, the power dynamic that has structured every interaction between them has been temporarily suspended. Andrew is not playing for Fletcher's approval. Fletcher is responding to something Andrew is doing that exceeds the category of approval, that exists in a space where the teacher-student relationship does not have jurisdiction. What Chazelle has said about Andrew's future, the sad empty shell, the death in his 30s, lands differently depending on whether it is read as the film's conclusion or as the director's private postscript. The film itself ends before any of that future arrives. It ends on the nod and the final chord and the cut to black. And in the space between the nod and the black, there is a version of the ending that is genuinely triumphant, in which Andrew has achieved the thing he organized his entire life around, and the achievement is real. There is also, in the same space, a version in which the father who came to watch has already been left behind in the wings, in which Nicole has already moved on, in which Sean Casey is already dead, in which the bleeding hands and the crashed car and the months of isolation and the expulsion and the betrayal and the walking back into the room that betrayed him have produced this single moment of musical transcendence that will exist for the length of the performance and then end. Both versions are true. The film contains both of them in the same frame. Looking at one requires briefly looking away from the other, and the film will not let the audience look away from either for long enough to be comfortable in either reading. The cut to black is the film's final argument, not because it withholds resolution, though it does withhold resolution, because it arrives at the exact moment when the music would have continued, when the performance is not quite finished, when Andrew is still inside the thing he has been reaching toward for the entire film. The cut does not come after the applause, or after the house lights, or after any of the conventional signals that a performance has ended and an audience has rendered its verdict. It comes inside the performance, in the final measures, at the point where what Andrew is playing has become something that the camera and the editing and the film itself seem unwilling or unable to contain any longer. The black is not silence, and it is not conclusion. It is the place where the film acknowledges that what is happening at the drum kit exceeds what the film can hold, and steps back from it, and leaves the audience in the space between the last note they heard and the note they did not get to hear. Chazelle shot the final sequence over several days with the kind of attention to the physical reality of the performance that the earlier practice sequences received. Teller played the drum solo repeatedly, across multiple takes, with the full band present and Fletcher's conducting providing the live interaction that the scene required. The fatigue visible in Teller's playing by the end of the shooting days became part of the performance, the physical depletion of extended drumming layering into the emotional truth of the scene in a way that could not have been manufactured through performance alone. The blood on the drumhead at the end of the solo is real in the sense that Teller's hands, after days of intensive playing, produced it. The film did not need to add it. The body provided it, as it always does when asked for more than it comfortably gives. Andrew looks up one more time in the final seconds before the cut. His face in this last look contains everything the film has been about and cannot be reduced to any single reading. There is exhaustion in it, and there is something that might be joy. And there is the specific expression of a person who has arrived somewhere they were reaching toward for so long that arrival itself feels unreal. Whether what he has arrived at is worth what it cost is the question his face does not answer. Because his face, in this moment, does not know the answer. He is 19 years old, and he has just played the best music of his life in front of a room full of people, and the man whose judgment organized his interior life for the past 2 years has just nodded at him. That is what is true right now. Everything else, the cost, the future, the question of what kind of person this pursuit has made him, belongs to a reckoning that has not arrived yet. The cut to black arrives first. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final performance gave Andrew what he was reaching for, or something very close to it, and the film ended before the reaching could be evaluated against everything it cost. That evaluation is the last thing Whiplash asks of the audience, and it belongs not inside the film, but in the space the cut to black opened up. Section 10. What Whiplash leaves behind. The larger lesson about ambition in any life. There is a question Whiplash never asks out loud, but that hums underneath every scene from the opening hallway to the final cut to black. It is not the question of whether Fletcher's methods are ethical, though the film examines that with more honesty than most. It is not the question of whether Andrew achieves greatness, though the film shows that he does, at least in the narrow musical sense. The question underneath everything, the one the film plants in the first image and refuses to answer in the last, is simpler and more personal and more difficult than either of those. It is this: what is ambition actually for? Not what does it produce, not what does it cost, but what is it in service of? What does the person carrying it believe it will give them when it finally delivers what it has been promising? And whether that belief has ever been examined against any evidence from the actual world. Andrew Neiman never asks this question. He cannot ask it, because asking it would require stepping outside the framework that organizes his experience of being alive. And the framework does not contain a door through which he could step outside it. His ambition is not a tool he is using in service of something larger than itself. It is the architecture of his selfhood, the structure inside which everything else he experiences is arranged and evaluated. To question the ambition would be to question the walls and the floor simultaneously while standing inside the building. And Andrew does not have a place to stand that is outside the building. The framework is total. It was total before Fletcher arrived, and Fletcher made it more total. Reinforced the walls, removed the windows, replaced the ordinary light of a life in relationship with other people with the specific, harsh light of the rehearsal room's single standard. By the end of the film, Andrew is living entirely inside a structure he did not build alone, but that he has accepted so completely that it is no longer distinguishable from himself. This is what Whiplash is about, when it is about something larger than jazz drumming, or abusive pedagogy, or the ethics of demanding instruction. It is about the particular danger of a life organized around a single, consuming pursuit, in a way that has never been subjected to the ordinary interrogation that most people apply, at some point in their development, to the things they want and why they want them. Andrew has never asked what the greatness is for. He has never asked what he expects to feel when it arrives, or whether the feeling he expects is one that greatness can actually produce, or whether the person he will be on the other side of the achievement is someone he would recognize or want to be. He has simply moved toward it with everything he has, sacrificing whatever the movement required. And the film watches this with the attention of something that is neither approving nor condemning, but genuinely curious about where the movement ends and what is found there. Damien Chazelle has spoken about the film as emerging from his own experience of wanting something with an intensity that made everything else secondary, of being inside a pursuit that felt total and necessary, and that he only began to see clearly from the outside after he had left it. He trained as a jazz drummer in a competitive high school program that he has described in interviews as genuinely frightening, genuinely pressurized, and genuinely formative in ways he is still working through. He wrote the Whiplash screenplay as a person who had been Andrew Neiman in some meaningful sense, and who was trying to understand what that had been and what it had cost, and whether the understanding was even possible from inside the life that the experience had produced. The film is not a condemnation of ambition from the position of someone who never had it. It is an examination of obsession from the inside, by someone who knows what the inside feels like and is trying to be honest about it. What makes Whiplash endure nearly a decade after its release is that the question it is asking is not specific to jazz drumming or music conservatories or the particular American mythology of greatness through suffering. The question belongs to anyone who has ever wanted something badly enough to organize their life around it. Anyone who has broken up with someone because the relationship was taking time they needed for the pursuit. Anyone who has sat at a family dinner and felt, with a combination of guilt and impatience, that the people around the table do not fully understand what they are trying to do or why it matters so much. Anyone who has looked at their bleeding hands, metaphorically or otherwise, and decided that the bleeding was evidence of seriousness rather than evidence of something worth stopping for. The film speaks to these people not because it tells them they are wrong, but because it shows them, with unusual honesty, what the logic they are living by looks like from the outside, and what it produces over time in the people who live by it completely. The figure of Sean Casey carries the film's most serious moral weight in this broader context. He is the demonstration that the pursuit does not produce the same result in everyone who undertakes it, that the mythology of suffering leading to transformation is a story about survivors told by survivors, that the people who did not survive the process are not represented in the story because they are not there to tell it. Every person who has ever cited a story of extreme sacrifice producing extraordinary achievement is citing the Andrew Neimans of their field, the people who went through the fire and came out capable of the final performance. The Sean Caseys do not get cited because they are not available to be cited, because what the fire produced in them was not transformation, but damage. And the damage is not a story anyone is telling at the conservatory, or in the mythology of jazz, or in the broader cultural narrative about what it takes to be great. Chazelle has said that he imagines Andrew dying in his 30s, alone, of a drug overdose, the way Charlie Parker died, the way a significant number of the musicians who achieved the kind of greatness Andrew is reaching toward died. This vision of Andrew's future is not in the film, but it is consistent with everything the film shows. A person who has spent years treating their body as an instrument, their relationships as liabilities, their ordinary human need for warmth and connection as weaknesses to be overcome, does not typically become, upon achieving the singular goal that organized all of that sacrifice, a person who suddenly knows how to live differently. The habits of selfhood are not so easily revised. Andrew, at 19, playing Caravan at the JVC Jazz Festival with blood on his hands, and his father standing in the wings of the stage he has just turned his back on, is becoming a specific kind of person. And the person he is becoming does not have an obvious path toward the ordinary happiness that the breakup scene with Nicole and the family dinner both gestured at as alternatives. He has made himself into an instrument, and instruments do not easily become people again. What the film leaves behind, in the cut to black and in the silence that follows it, is not a judgment. Chazelle has been careful about this, in the film and in everything he has said about it. Whiplash does not tell the audience that ambition is wrong, or that the pursuit of greatness is a mistake, or that ordinary life is superior to the life of extraordinary achievement. It does not offer the family dinner as a redemption, or Nicole's warmth as the answer to the question Andrew has been asking. It simply shows, with the fullest honesty it can manage, what the choice to organize a life around a single consuming pursuit actually looks like, in its daily texture and its human cost, and its eventual product. And it leaves the audience with the question that Andrew never asked. Not whether he is great. He is great. Not whether Fletcher's methods worked. They worked. On him, in the narrow sense. The question is what the greatness is for. What Andrew will do with it the morning after the performance, and the morning after that. And whether the person sitting at the drum kit in the silence after the final chord is someone who knows how to be alive outside of the music, or whether the music has become the only place left where he knows how to exist. The film does not answer this. Neither does Andrew. The cut to black arrives before either of them has to, and the question goes with the audience out of the theater and into their own lives, where it tends to find, if the audience has been honest with themselves while watching, some purchase on something personal and close and not entirely comfortable. That is what Whiplash leaves behind. Not a lesson about music, a question about what we are reaching for, and whether we have ever stopped long enough in the reaching to ask what we expect to find when we get there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.